The Watcher in the Rain. Sarah first noticed him on a Tuesday. It was one of those bone-deep October evenings when the rain came down like bullets against her apartment window, and she'd been nursing her third cup of coffee while grading papers. Something made her look up. Maybe it was the way the streetlight caught the reflection of movement, or maybe it was that primal instinct that screams when predator eyes are watching prey. He stood across the street, motionless as a scarecrow, rain streaming off his dark coat. Even from the fourth floor, she could see the pale oval of his face turned up toward her window. When their eyes met, he didn't move, didn't wave, didn't pretend to be waiting for a bus like normal people do when caught staring. He just watched. Sarah pulled the curtains shut and told herself it was nothing. City living. Weirdos came with the territory like roaches and overpriced coffee. But when she peeked through the curtains 20 minutes later, he was still there, rain-soaked and patient as death. The next morning, she'd almost convinced herself it was her imagination. Almost. Until she saw him again at the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle with an empty cart, watching her select yogurt 3 aisles over. This time, when she looked directly at him, he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that belongs in a morgue. Sarah's hand shook as she paid for her groceries. She considered telling the cashier, but what would she say? A man smiled at me? The police would laugh her out of the station. But the fear was real. It crawled up her spine like a spider. By Thursday, she'd started taking different routes to work. She varied her grocery store, her gym, even the coffee shop where she'd been a regular for 2 years. It didn't matter. He was always there, always watching, always wearing that same dark coat. Friday night, she called her sister. "Maybe he's just lonely," Jessica said. "Maybe he has a crush and doesn't know how to approach you." "Lonely men don't stand in the rain for hours," Sarah whispered, peering through her blinds. He wasn't there tonight, but somehow that felt worse. They don't follow you to 7 different locations. So call the police. And tell them what? That a man exists in the same spaces I do? But Saturday, she tried anyway. Officer Martinez was kind but useless. Without a direct threat, without contact, there was nothing they could do. "Keep a log," he suggested. "If he escalates, we'll have documentation." Escalates. The word sat in her stomach like a stone. Sunday, she found the first note. It was tucked under her windshield wiper, soggy from morning dew. The handwriting was careful, almost childlike. "You looked beautiful in the yellow sweater yesterday, the one with the small stain on the left sleeve. I wanted to tell you, but I was too shy. Soon, we'll talk properly." Sarah's hands trembled as she read it again. The yellow sweater. She'd spilled coffee on it at work, a tiny spot she'd thought no one would notice. But he'd noticed. He'd been close enough to see a stain the size of a dime. The second note appeared Tuesday, slipped under her apartment door. "I know you're scared. I can see it in the way you check over your shoulder. You don't need to be afraid of me. I would never hurt you. I love you too much." Love. The word made her skin crawl. She'd never spoken to this man, never even been within 20 feet of him, but he loved her. The way a collector loves a butterfly pinned to a board. Wednesday, she stayed home from work, called in sick and triple-checked her locks. But when she went to get her mail at noon, she found him in the lobby, standing by the mailboxes like he belonged there. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35, with thinning hair and pale hands. When he saw her, his face lit up like Christmas morning. "Sarah," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. "I've been hoping we'd meet properly." She ran, dropped her keys twice getting back to her apartment, slammed the door, and called the police. This time, they came. This time, they took it seriously. But when they searched the building, he was gone. "We'll increase patrols," Officer Martinez promised. Thursday night, Sarah woke to the sound of scratching at her door, soft, persistent, like a cat wanting in. She crept to the peephole and saw him there, kneeling in the hallway, running his fingernails along the bottom of her door, back and forth, back and forth. She called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone again. Only the scratches remained, pale gouges in the painted wood, but Sarah knew it wouldn't matter. He was a ghost, a shadow, there one moment and gone the next, and he was getting bolder. Friday, she found him in her car. She'd been carrying groceries when she opened the back door and saw him sitting in her back seat like a patient passenger. He'd somehow gotten past her locks, past her alarm system. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly. "I thought it was time we talked." This time, she didn't run. This time, she stood frozen as he climbed out of her car, stood close enough that she could smell his cologne, something sweet and cloying, like flowers on a grave. "I know you're frightened," he continued, his voice gentle as a lullaby. "But you don't need to be. I've been watching you long enough to know you're perfect. We're perfect together." "Stay away from me," she managed to whisper. He smiled that morgue smile again. "I can't do that, Sarah. You're in my blood now, in my dreams, in every breath I take." He reached out as if to touch her face, but she flinched back. "Soon, you'll see that we were meant to be together." Then he was gone, melting into the evening shadows like smoke. That night, Sarah packed a bag. She would stay with Jessica until this nightmare ended. But as she zipped up her suitcase, she heard it, the soft scraping at her door. Only this time, it wasn't fingernails. It was a key. The lock clicked open as Sarah grabbed her phone and purse. She bolted for the fire escape, but her window was painted shut. Behind her, she heard her front door swing open, heard his footsteps on her floor. "Sarah?" His voice was sing-song now, playful. "I brought you something special." She managed to force the window open just as he appeared in her bedroom doorway. In his hands he held a wedding dress, vintage white lace yellowed with age. "I've been saving this," he said, holding it up like an offering. "It was my mother's. She would have loved you, Sarah." Sarah squeezed through the window onto the fire escape, the metal slick with rain. 4 stories down, the alley waited in darkness. Behind her, she heard him laugh. Not angry, but delighted. "You can't run forever," he called after her. "I know where you work, where your sister lives. I know everything about you, Sarah. Everything." She made it to the second floor before the rusted ladder gave way. The fall wasn't far, but it was enough. Her ankle twisted, sent lightning up her leg. She limped toward the street, toward the lights and safety. But when she turned back, he was standing at her window, still holding the wedding dress, still smiling, still watching. The rain began to fall again, and Sarah realized with crystalline clarity that this was just the beginning. He would follow her wherever she went. He would be patient. He would be persistent. And someday, when she was tired of running, when she was worn down by fear and exhaustion, she would stop. She would turn around. And he would be there, waiting, with his mother's wedding dress and his graveyard smile and all the time in the world. The rain fell harder, washing away her footprints, her tears, her hope. But it would never wash away the memory of his voice, calling her name in the darkness, promising forever. The Watcher in the Woods. Rebecca Chin had always been careful. 28 years of living in the city had taught her to lock her doors, check her surroundings, and trust her instincts when something felt wrong. She carried pepper spray, took self-defense classes, and never walked alone after dark. But all the precautions in the world couldn't have prepared her for what started as a simple feeling of being watched. It began on a Tuesday morning in September, when the leaves were just starting to turn and the air carried that crisp promise of autumn. Rebecca was walking to her job at the downtown library, the same route she'd taken for 3 years, when she felt it. That peculiar sensation of eyes on her back, like invisible fingers tracing the line of her spine. She turned around, scanning the busy sidewalk behind her. Commuters hurried past with their coffee cups and briefcases, joggers weaved between pedestrians, and a homeless man sat on a bench feeding pigeons. Nothing unusual, nothing that should have made her skin crawl the way it did. But the feeling persisted. When she reached the library and looked back one more time, she saw him. He was standing across the street, partially hidden behind a newspaper stand. Tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair and a face she couldn't quite make out from the distance. He was wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, the kind of nondescript clothing that made him blend into the urban landscape like camouflage. But it was the way he was standing that made Rebecca's blood run cold, perfectly still, focused, like a predator watching prey. The moment their eyes met, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the morning crowd as if he'd never been there at all. The next morning, he was there again. Same spot, same gray hoodie, same predatory stillness. By the end of the second week, Rebecca had memorized every detail she could see. He was probably in his 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting. He always wore the same gray hoodie, though she'd started to notice he had others. "Have you called the police?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice gentle but concerned. "And tell them what?" Rebecca replied, her frustration evident. "That a man stands on public sidewalks? That he hasn't approached me or threatened me or even spoken to me? They'll think I'm paranoid." The worst part was how he seemed to know her schedule better than she did. If she decided to work late, he'd be waiting when she finally left the library. If she stayed home, she'd see him from her apartment window, standing under a streetlight like some kind of urban scarecrow. It was on a rainy Thursday evening in October that Rebecca finally got her first real look at him. She was leaving the library later than usual when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting to see one of her coworkers, and found herself face to face with her stalker. He was closer than he'd ever been before, maybe 10 feet away, and for the first time she could see his face clearly. He was smiling. Not a friendly smile, or even a predatory one. It was the smile of someone who'd been playing a game and had just realized he was winning. "Hello, Rebecca," he said, and his voice was exactly what she'd expected. Soft, cultured, with the kind of careful pronunciation that suggested education and intelligence. "I've been wanting to talk to you." "I don't know you," she said. "But I know you," he replied, taking a step closer. "I know you take your coffee black, that you read mystery novels on your lunch break, that you call your sister every Tuesday night. I know you're afraid of spiders but not snakes, that you volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends." "What do you want?" she asked, her hand tightening on the pepper spray. His smile widened. "I want to know you better. You're interesting, Rebecca. More interesting than the others." The others. She wasn't his first victim. "I have to go," she said, backing away slowly. "Of course you do," he agreed. "But I'll see you tomorrow, Rebecca, and the day after that. I'm very patient, you see. I can wait as long as it takes." It was then that Rebecca made a decision. She was going to turn the tables on her stalker. She was going to become the hunter instead of the hunted. She spent the weekend researching stalking behavior and investigative techniques. He was intelligent, patient, and methodical. Most importantly, he was arrogant. That arrogance, Rebecca realized, might be his weakness. Instead of avoiding her stalker, she began to study him as carefully as he'd been studying her. It took 3 weeks of careful observation, but Rebecca finally identified where her stalker lived. It was a basement apartment in a run-down building 6 blocks from the library. She waited until she saw him leave, then slipped into his building and made her way to his basement apartment. The apartment was sparse, functional, obsessively organized, but it was what covered the walls that made Rebecca's blood run cold. Photographs, hundreds of them, pictures of her taken from every conceivable angle. But it wasn't just photos of her. There were pictures of other women, too. Some of the photos were crossed out with red ink, and Rebecca didn't want to think about what that meant. In the center was a desk covered with notebooks. The notebooks contained plans for what he called the next phase of their relationship. According to his timeline, the next phase was scheduled to begin tomorrow night. But as she prepared to leave, Rebecca heard footsteps in the hallway above. He was coming back. The door opened slowly, and Rebecca held her breath as her stalker stepped into the apartment. Then he smiled, that terrible smile she remembered from the rain. "Hello, Rebecca," he said softly. "I was wondering when you'd finally come to visit me." He'd known she was there all along. He'd been orchestrating the entire thing. "You can come out now," he continued. "Did you really think you could outsmart someone who's been doing this as long as I have?" Rebecca stepped out, pepper spray raised, but he was faster. The pepper spray went flying, and her phone shattered against the wall. "The others tried to fight too," he said conversationally. "It never works out the way they think it will." "What do you want?" she asked. His smile widened. "I want to show you the next phase," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a length of rope. "I want to teach you what it really means to be watched." The last thing Rebecca saw before the world went dark was that wall of photographs, all those crossed-out faces staring down at her with empty eyes. Rebecca Chin had always been careful, but sometimes being careful isn't enough. Sometimes the monster finds you anyway.